Israeli officials have confirmed that if Hamas refuses to release the remaining Israeli hostages, the IDF will escalate in force until Hamas is completely wiped out. At the same time, more than 9,000 Palestinian residents have left Gaza City and moved towards the southern part of the Strip, depriving Hamas of their human shields and making it much easier for the IDF to finish the job. However, that might not be necessary, as almost all of the details have been worked out for the completion of the plan that President Trump put on the table last Monday during his joint press conference with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio has expressed hope that the logistical details of the agreement will be finalized very quickly, but emphasized that this should not be seen as the absolute end of the war in the Gaza Strip. President Trump was more blunt in his remarks to CNN on Sunday, telling them that Hamas faces total annihilation if it insists on remaining in power in the Gaza Strip. Israel inserted a clause in the agreement with Hamas that leaves no room for doubt, and this time the Hamas terror organization will not be able to play games during the release of the hostages. The US president presented in a post on his Truth Social network that Israel's initial withdrawal line, under which the IDF will continue to control the Philadelphia corridor, Rafah, and Bet Hanun. That said, Netanyahu offered a cautious note, saying, "I cannot promise that Hamas will release all the hostages." As if to prove this point, a Hamas official who survived the attempts to assassinate him in Doha, Qatar, last month, gave his first media interview this week and made the typical defiant speeches and a truly despicable statement. And finally, in the northern arena, there is upheaval in Beirut as Iran and Saudi Arabia attempt to reconcile their competing visions for Lebanon's future. Welcome to Boots on the Ground. I'm Mati Shoshani, filling in for Yair Pinto, who's on vacation this week. The US president has sent another threatening message to Hamas, saying he expects to find out quickly in the Egypt talks if the terror organization is serious about achieving peace. Israel has already proved its own seriousness by suspending offensive operations in Gaza City to give the negotiations a chance. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that in his assessment, 90% of the hostage deal details are closed, and the remaining negotiations cannot continue for weeks or even a few days. Israel inserted a clause in the agreement with Hamas that leaves no room for doubt. Clause 5 may have slipped under the radar, and it ensures that Hamas will not be able to play games during the release of the hostages. Additionally, a report in the Arab media portrays claims that release will process without ceremonies like what happened in previous cycles of releases. On the Saudi channel Asharq, details were provided by a Hamas source about the organization's expected demands in the talks with Israel and the mediators that will open on Monday in Egypt. And meanwhile, President Donald Trump presented in a post on his social media network, Truth Social, Israel's initial withdrawal line. For his part, Prime Minister Netanyahu has declared that the responsibility for accepting the deal and returning the hostages lies entirely with Hamas, and demanded full acceptance of the plan without reservations. At the same time, he sharply criticized Europe, claiming it surrendered to terror when it recognized a Palestinian state. Now, amidst all this diplomatic action, there were also some developments in the northern arena over the last 24 hours. A report in Lebanese media reveals that a recent visit to Beirut and Raida by Ali Larijani, Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council for Iran, served as a channel for Iranian-Saudi coordination on the Lebanese file. The meetings reduced tensions and were defined as positive, but tangible results will require time and political patience. Saudi Arabia and Iran have very different ideas about what would be the best way forward in Lebanon, and it would probably take more than one visit by an Iranian official to clear all that up. We have a lot to talk about today, so let's dive into the details. I'm Mati Shoshani, and this is your Boots on the Ground report about what's happening in Israel on day 731 of the war against Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, the Shiite militias in Iraq, and all the other armed groups in this region operating under the orders of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the head of the crumbling axis of evil in the Middle East. And a moment before we begin, I want to call on you to continue spreading the truth. Share and follow us, and most importantly, remember, Israel is under an unceasing assault of lies and fake news, funded by radical Islamic organizations that present reality in a distorted way and defame the people of Israel. That is why we're here to defend and stand at the front line of truth. So help us fight evil, leave a comment, hit the like button, click the subscribe button, and let's begin. We'll start with a quick report coming to us from Syria as forces of the IDF's 226th Brigade under the command of the 210th Division have operated over the past 2 months on a defensive mission in southern Syria. The brigade's forces completed dozens of targeted operations, arresting suspects in terror activity and confiscating weapons, in order to ensure the protection of the citizens of the State of Israel, and in particular, the Golan Heights residents. We'll have more news coming from Israel's northern arena in a moment, but first, let's take a look at the latest reports from the Gaza Strip. More than 900,000 Palestinian residents have left Gaza City and moved towards the humanitarian area in the southern part of the Strip. According to estimates in Southern Command, over the past 2 weeks, the average number leaving the city has stood between 30 to 50,000 residents per day, and the assessment is that the numbers will continue to rise. In the security establishment, they praised the plan of Southern Command, according to which the number of Palestinians expected to leave the city will soon reach 1 million, as the plan Hamas had to try and persuade the Palestinian public to remain in the city that collapsed. The plan included influence efforts and deterrent actions, intimidation, physical harm, and road blockages, but it wasn't enough. The removal of Gaza City's civilian population means Hamas no longer has any human shields to hide behind, and since they didn't have any plan B for how to push back against the IDF advance, they now have even fewer options for continuing this war. However, there are still an estimated 200,000 residents in the city, and a hardcore of Hamas supporters have positioned themselves at important strongholds, determined to fight to the bitter end. Now, a moment before we move on to the news from the diplomatic front, I want to take a moment and talk about the struggles that ordinary Israelis are dealing with every day and how you can help. Now, in this troubling time, one of the most powerful ways you can help Israel is by buying blue and white, products made in this land itself. At Blessed by Israel, we bring you handcrafted, high-quality treasures straight from the biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria. From fragrant olive oil and golden honey to nourishing soaps, creamy tahini, and rich coffee blends, every item carries the legacy of families faithfully working the land God promised to Abraham. And when you purchase these gifts, we're not just shopping, you're blessing Israel's people. You're supporting small family businesses and fulfilling scripture. I will bless those who bless you. And it's never been easier. With flexible subscription options at discounted rates, you can keep standing with Israel month after month. So visit blessedbyisrael.com/stand today, and let's renew the land together, one blue and white purchase at a time. Now we're getting back into the news and taking a look at some of the diplomatic moves that are happening together in order. First, it must be made very clear that the IDF ceased offensive operations in Gaza City on Saturday and switched to a defensive posture only. But this is a halt of fire, not a ceasefire, and that is a distinction that matters enormously. A ceasefire is the outcome of negotiations, while a halt of fire is intended to enable them. That's the situation of the time, as the talks between Israel and Hamas, with broad international mediation, are supposed to open in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt. Now, regarding those talks, as of Sunday evening, here's how it looks. Hamas has responded to the plan presented by US President Donald Trump by saying yes, but, and laying out several conditions of their own. President Trump appears to have decided to accept this as a resounding yes, and Israel, for lack of better options, said that if Hamas said yes, then that means the release of the hostages. On one thing, there is no dispute, as all sides understand that the momentum created by President Trump in his unique way must be leveraged to pull the process forward. The coalescence of Arab states behind this initiative also creates a lever of pressure on Hamas that simply didn't exist beforehand. Now, in other words, Israel said yes, and that satisfied President Trump, while Hamas said yes, but, and therefore it seems that most of the pressure will be applied to Hamas. Now let's take a look at some of the key sticking points in this discussion. According to the IDF's initial withdrawal map from the Gaza Strip, which President Trump presented on Saturday, from the moment the forces withdraw from Gaza City, from the Netzarim axis in the center of the Strip, and from large areas in Khan Yunis and Rafah in its south, Hamas will be able to return to those areas with a Gazan population and rehabilitate its infrastructure there, but this time it will be far more difficult for it. As gray and nebulous as it may be, the yellow line map that the administration in Washington circulated yesterday as the initial withdrawal line for the release of the hostages, it leaves the IDF temporary control and, in a scenario of talks being unsuccessful, even permanent. The new map is more detailed, and it is clearly seen on it that Rafah remains under Israeli control, and with it, also the Philadelphia corridor on the border with Egypt. And in the northern strip, Bet Hanun is explicitly included on the map in the area that will remain under Israeli control. After this initial withdrawal in order to enable the release of the hostages, Israel is supposed at a later stage to gradually transfer control of additional areas to an Arab Muslim international force that is supposed to be established and to ensure the demilitarization of the Strip. According to the original withdrawal map, published as part of the plan, the IDF will continue even afterwards to control a security perimeter along the Strip's border and also its border with Egypt, in Philadelphia, until it is completely ensured that there is no terror threat from the Gaza Strip. That is the exact verbiage of the agreement. On the face of it, the yellow line map is very positive for Israel, and at long last, the goal of the war in the form of returning the hostages from captivity will be achieved, while the IDF will still remain in a buffer area deeper than the existing security zone. Accordingly, the army will push threats even farther from the sensitive places, and in the southern strip, it will control the belly of Rafah to preserve the achievements obtained there and to prevent in this sector the rebuilding of Hamas. If after the release of the hostages, the negotiations do not progress and Israel once again enters a freeze with Hamas, the IDF will still control areas that were under Israeli control before the 2005 disengagement. In the northern strip, for example, the Nissanit Ridge will be under IDF control, and in the southern strip, part of what was once Gush Katif will remain, thanks to the continued hold over the Philadelphia corridor bordering Egypt. That opens up some interesting possibilities, but we won't get into that right now as it's entirely speculative. In any case, the negotiations over the details of the arrangement were expected to begin in Sharm el-Sheikh over the last 24 hours. The Israeli delegation is headed by Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, and from the US, Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and President Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner, are also participating. Prime Minister Netanyahu defines these talks as intended to close the technical details of the release of our hostages, and added that Israel and the US want to finish the negotiations within a few days. He also left open the possibility of a resumption of fighting if the talks fail, saying in the second stage of the agreement, Hamas will be disarmed and the Strip will be demilitarized. This will happen either by diplomatic path, according to President Trump's plan, or by a military path by us. Either it will be achieved by an easy way or the hard way, but it will be achieved. He also declared during an exclusive interview to the European news agency Euronews on Sunday that the responsibility for accepting the US-mediated deal and returning the hostages lies fully with Hamas, and he rejected any possibility of a partial acceptance of the plan. He continued by saying that the deal, if Hamas accepts it, could be the beginning of the end of the war. Hamas became flexible when it understood that the end is near. Let's hope we can finish this the easy way and not the hard way. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on these issues, and we invite you to be part of the team by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, and above all, don't forget to click on the subscribe button if you haven't already, so you stay tuned to the truth and never miss an episode of Boots on the Ground. Continuing with the subject of these negotiations in Cairo, one of the significant clauses in President Trump's outline may have slipped under the radar. In clause number 5 of US President Donald Trump's plan for the release of the hostages, it was stated that only once all the hostages are released, Israel will release the security prisoners from Israeli prisons. This gives Hamas a powerful incentive to complete the release of all the hostages quickly and without any tricks. Additionally, Arab media portals are reporting that the release of the hostages this time around will be carried out without the Hamas ceremonies that were held in past events. The coordinator for prisoners and missing persons, Gal Hirsch, met with Julian Lyelson, head of the Red Cross delegation in recent days, to go over some of the details about the impending release of hostages. And meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said that meetings are being held in regarding the agreement between Israel and Hamas and hoped that the logistics of it will be completed very quickly. When asked if this is the end of the war in Gaza, he replied, "Not yet. There remains some work to do." And when asked whether he expected the release of hostages this week, he said that he wants the release of the hostages as soon as possible. As for the day after, Rubio said that Hamas agreed in principle to what will happen after the war. He said, "The second stage, the stage you are discussing, the disarmament, the dismantling of forces, this is not going to be easy. It's going to be hard. You can't set up a government structure in Gaza that is not Hamas's in 3 days. We will know very quickly if Hamas is serious." Amidst all of this, a Hamas source confirmed on Sunday that Hamas has begun collecting the remains of the hostages who've died in captivity. I want to say murdered in captivity. That's a more correct use of the word. These sources also told the Saudi channel El Arabiya that Hamas demanded a halt to Israeli strikes in order to complete this step. He also noted that the release of the living hostages will be in one single step, whereas the delivery of the remains of the fallen could take several more days. He claimed there's an understanding and even a certain flexibility on the part of the United States regarding this issue. And he also claimed that Hamas received guarantees from the Americans via Qatar regarding a permanent Israeli withdrawal. In addition, he clarified that Hamas agreed to hand over its weapons to a Palestinian Egyptian body under international supervision, and conveyed that the exile of Hamas senior leaders from the Strip will depend on their decision. That same source also noted that Hamas provided the mediators with a list of the living and fallen hostages, so that this list would be presented to Israel. At the same time, he clarified that Israel knows how many living hostages there are and how many fallen, and he also noted that there are American guarantees regarding non-harm to Hamas senior leaders. He also emphasized that the negotiations will take place quickly and intensively, since Hamas's interest, as well as that the negotiations will be conducted swiftly. Candidly, I hope that's true, and I'd like to believe it is true, but I also have to say that I'll believe it when I see it. On that note, sources in the Hamas terror organization told the Saudi media portal Ashraq over the weekend that the mechanisms and implementation criteria of the agreement for the release of the hostages, which will be discussed in the negotiations in Egypt, will include a Hamas demand for a full ceasefire, a withdrawal of the IDF to the withdrawal lines from the hostage release agreement last January. That's all fine and good, and I'm sure these details will all get hammered out in the negotiations. Now let's move on to what President Trump said in his interview with CNN's Jake Tapper on Sunday. In response to a question from Tapper about what would happen to Hamas if it refused to relinquish its hold on the Gaza Strip, Trump replied, "Total annihilation," and added, in a similar vein to what Secretary of State Rubio said, that he expects to know very soon how serious Hamas is. He also said in this interview that Senator Lindsey Graham, a close political ally of the president, might be right when he said that Hamas has effectively rejected the plan by not addressing the issue of the demilitarization and future control in Gaza. He also confirmed that Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed to stop offensive operations to give time for the negotiations to play out. Speaking of Netanyahu, he also had some statements to make over the weekend. On Sunday, he said that if the hostages are not released by the time set by President Trump in his plan, namely within 72 hours, Israel will return to fighting with the full backing of all countries involved. However, Hamas officials insisted today as well in a conversation with the New York Times that the terror organization would find it difficult to release all the hostages within 72 hours, and that even Israel understands this, due to the difficulty of locating remains that might have been buried under the rubble of buildings destroyed in the fighting. However, the first question that is scheduled to be discussed in Cairo talks is the release of the living hostages, as well as with additional Palestinian demands that include an IDF redeployment in the Strip. Beyond that, in exchange for the living and fallen hostages, Hamas is demanding the release of 250 terrorists imprisoned in Israel, among them Marwan Barghouti, who has been in prison for more than 23 years and is widely popular on the Palestinian street, even being considered as the most likely candidate to replace the aging Mahmoud Abbas as a leader of the Palestinian Authority. Now, speaking about the Palestinian Authority, they have emphasized that in the list of imprisoned terrorists, there are very few political figures with influence, and most of them are expected to return to their homes and not engage in politics. Among these prisoners is also Ahmed Sadat, who is considered a leftist Marxist and an opponent of the PA's policy. He is indeed considered a prominent figure, but with limited influence. The other politicians are not contenders or actual competitors in the PA's future, and most of them are not real competitors for the PA's rule. With all of that in mind, Netanyahu's office ordered the departure of Israel's delegation to Sharm el-Sheikh on Sunday evening. But Strategic Affairs Minister Ron Dermer will apparently arrive only on Tuesday, about the same time as U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Trump's son-in-law Jared Kushner. Now, amidst these developments, the euphoria many in Israel felt over the weekend as it appeared a successful end to the war might be imminent and beginning to fade, as we face the sober reality that there is much that still needs to be done before this deal can be considered a final deal. Prime Minister Netanyahu met on Sunday with representatives of the Forum of Valor and promised them that Israel will not move on to any clause out of the 21 clauses of this agreement until the first clause, the release of all the hostages, both living and dead, until the last hostage, including everyone, crosses into Israeli territory. We will not move on to any other clause. The Prime Minister also spoke to the issue of the Palestinian Authority, saying it will not rule Gaza on the day after, and added, no representative of Hamas terror organization and the representatives of the Palestinian Authority will be involved in control of the Strip. It's important to point out that this is contrary to Hamas's demand for a Palestinian technocrat committee that would take control of the Strip while it's involved in decision-making. Also notable are some comments the president made in the context of an interview on Sunday with Channel 14's correspondent in Washington, Libby Alon, saying it's a wonderful agreement for Israel and it's a good agreement for everyone. You want the hostages back, right? It's a good deal for Israel, it's a good deal for the entire Muslim world and the whole world, so we are very happy about it. He also said that the contacts between the sides are progressing excellently. Either way, one thing is clear. This time, Hamas will not be allowed to drag things out. By the end of the week, one of two things is supposed to happen. The hostages return home, or fighting in the Gaza Strip resumes, and this time with no intention to stop. Here at TBN Israel, we will continue to report on all developments going forward. As always, we invite you to be part of this team by sharing our videos on YouTube, following us on social media, leaving a comment, and above all, be sure to click the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. These are the ways you can help us spread the truth. Now let's shift our focus back to the northern arena. According to a recent report by the Lebanese news portal Al-Nashra, the visit of Secretary General of the Supreme National Security Council in Iran, Ali Larinjani, to Lebanon last August carried significant messages that touched not only on the future of Hezbollah, but also on the ties between Tehran and Riyadh. During his visit to Beirut, held a few days after Lebanon's government tasked the army with preparing a plan to implement the disarmament of Hezbollah by the end of the year, Larinjani met President Yosef Ayoun, Parliament Speaker Nabia Berri, Prime Minister Nawaf Salam, and several other senior figures, including Hezbollah's Secretary General Naim Qassem. According to the sources, the meetings also served to convey clear messages. Various actors in Lebanon asked Larinjani to enlist the channels of dialogue with Saudi Arabia in order to reduce internal pressure in the country and to lessen the intensity of the political rift. On September 15th, Larinjani conducted a high-profile visit to Saudi Arabia, where he met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and with the Defense Minister Prince Khalid bin Salman. The talks focused on strengthening security and economic operations between the countries, but according to the reports, the Lebanese file was also on the table. Among other things, the possibility of promoting joint coordination between Iran and Saudi Arabia was discussed, with the aim of reducing the intensity of clashes in Lebanon and establishing a framework of positive cooperation rather than confrontation. The report noted that Larinjani's first visit to Lebanon already helped lower the flames, whereas his second visit, held for the first anniversary of the death of Hassan Nasrallah, was perceived in a much more positive atmosphere. It's important to note that Iran and Saudi Arabia have very different versions for what the future of the Middle East in general, and Lebanon in particular, should look like. It will take more than a meeting or two between senior officials of these different countries to smooth out all these differences. Needless to say, Israel has an interest in all of this, as does the US and as do other countries, from Turkey and Russia to the European countries and even China. There's always more than meets the eye in the Middle East, and that's why here at TBN Israel, we always keep both eyes wide open so we can see the big picture and bring you the truth. And on that note, of course, we will continue to report on every development in these matters, so please share and follow us. And most importantly, don't forget to click the subscribe button. But most importantly, don't forget to pray. Pray for all our hostages who are held in Gaza. Continue to pray for the peace of the IDF soldiers wherever they are, in the air, at sea, on land. Pray for the peace of the people of Israel. And above all, do not forget to pray for the peace of Jerusalem. Hello, this is Mati here in Jerusalem with TBN Israel.
This is Yair Pinto from TBN Israel here in Jerusalem. TBN Israel is keeping viewers informed with Israel-focused news, culture, and what God is doing in this land.
Support TBN Israel today online at tbn.org/Israel. Thank you.